says on the screen, we'll be talking about the changes to the truth in lending disclosure. So the law itself hasn't changed, but the interpretation of the law has. What basically happened is there was a group of dealers in New Jersey who got in trouble for the way they were disclosing truth in lending. And normally this wouldn't be a big deal. Unfortunately, dealers get in trouble for things all the time. But within that lawsuit, what happened is there were some definitions laid out of what the truth in lending disclosure should be, and they were outside of the norm that we generally use as an industry standard. So that's where I want to make sure that everybody knows the new industry standard that everybody should be using when it comes to truth in lending disclosure. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through basic material, the guidelines for how truth in lending should be disclosed. And I'm going to do that. If you've been on any of these webinars before, I do that through our compliance portal. I'll play a video for you, and then at the end, we're going to go ahead and I'll answer any questions that you may have. I went ahead and set out a message through the chat feature on GoToMeeting. That's where I'm going to ask you guys to put in any questions you may have. I will answer those at the end once we get through all the material, but feel free to put any questions in the chat feature as we go, and then I'll just circle back around to that. So let me go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do real quick is just show you guys where I'm getting this information from. So all of our online training at Garage Composites is housed within Wheelhouse College. Wheelhouse College is our custom LMS that Brandy is in charge of, she's created with some developers. That is where we house all of Sam's Garage, which is the power sports training, Sam's Dock, which is the water sports or boat training, and then Sam's Peloton, which is the training for the bicycle industry. And then here we have our power sports dealership compliance certification. And that is where we have all of the compliance information. That's where you can go to get your compliance manager certified. All of this information is within this portal. So what I'm going to do, I've already signed in and pulled up the video that we're going to watch. We're going to watch it's about 5 minutes here. And then once we go through the video, I'm going to pop back on here and we'll talk about how this applies. And I'll just clarify and make sure everybody understands exactly the points you want to hit when it comes to the truth in lending disclosure as it's defined now. So go ahead and go ahead and expand the video. There we go.
So this video is going to walk you through how to properly disclose the TILA disclosure on your contract. Now, the Truth in Lending Act was recently, we'll say, reinterpreted. Whenever there's an action in court, what that does is set a precedent as to how laws are interpreted and applied in the real world moving forward. So as I mentioned before, in New Jersey with some car dealerships, there was a lawsuit where the dealer was found to have not been compliant with Truth in Lending Act due to a couple practices, and they're pretty standard disclosure practices that everybody's been using. So I want you to pay close attention. There are two key elements that need to change if you are not doing this already. So the two key things that the dealer got in trouble for is, number one, they did not give the customer full control over the contract prior to disclosure. So you want to make sure that you slide the contract across the desk, take your hand off the contract, make sure the customer has full control over the contract before you disclose. The other thing that you need to do is, turn away, look away, whatever, give the customer ample time to review the contract and then come back and say, do you have any questions before I get started? Now, with electronic contracting, what that means is that the customer needs to have full control over the mouse. They need to be able to scroll through the contract and review it before you disclose it. And then you need to, again, ask, hey, do you have any questions before I get started? So when you get into disclosing the truth in lending disclosure, you want to make sure and point out the different areas that you have here. So we have your annual percentage rate, we have your finance charge, of course, the amount financed, we have the total of all your payments, and then the total of all your payments with your down payment, and that is the total amount that the customer is going to be paying for the vehicle. You then have the number of payments, which I always like to say that out loud. You know, you have 48 months, and your payment is going to be the $435 we agreed to, and your first payment due date is, and then I like to say that aloud, just to make sure that that is 100% clear. They know when their payments are, how much they are, and how many they have. Now, a couple things you'll notice about this disclosure. The disclosure does not talk about things like documentation fees. It does not cover late charges, bad check fees, things like that that could also impact the amount that the customer pays for the vehicle. That stuff is going to be outlined in different areas on the contract or different documentation that they have from the bank. Now, because this is a static disclosure, this is really an estimate of what the customer is going to pay. If the customer pays a day early or a day late, that changes the amount of interest the customer pays because the interest is calculated daily. And if you pay late or early, it changes that. Now, you are not required to reissue this truth in lending disclosure if that changes. That is totally acceptable for you to issue this one time, and the customer knows that if they pay late or early, then of course this will change. So one more thing I want to talk about when it comes to truth in lending. There is one piece that talks about what needs to be disclosed when advertisements are put in a paper or put on TV. Now, we're going to talk in depth about the federal advertising rules in Chapter 8, and that'll go into a lot more of what needs to be disclosed and how and all that kind of stuff. Attila in particular says that there are certain triggering terms that then require full disclosure of the terms of the loan you're talking about. So the triggering terms are the dollar amount or percentage of the money down, number of payments, the amount of any payment, or the dollar amount of any finance charge. So if you talk about any of those triggering terms within an advertisement, you then need to list the APR that the loan is being calculated on and have all of your information there that's required for disclosure under Attila. If you have any more specific questions about that in particular, you can look that up on pages 27 and 28 in your textbook.
Okay, so let's see. The big stuff that I want to make sure that is 100% clear is the activity that you want, or the pieces you need to hit on in order to make sure you're disclosing properly. So if you are working with a paper contract, make sure that you print out the contract, you hand the customer the contract, and take your hands off the contract. At that point in time, tell the customer, hey, you can, if you'd like to, you can look over the contract. I will be right back in just one moment. You want to turn away, go print something else, go do something else that gives the customer absolute full control over the contract. When you come back, just simply ask them, do you have any questions before I get started? The beautiful part of that is that most customers don't even know what they're looking at. So they're not going to have any questions. They're going to say, no. And then you can go ahead and go through the whole contract with them. What I recommend is that we start at the top of the contract always. This is who you are. This is who we are. Usually lists out this is what you're purchasing. And then this right here is your truth in lending disclosure. And you want to say that when you point it out, because that is part of what you're required to do, is point out the truth in lending disclosure. And then, like I said in the video, just go through and, this is your APR, this is your finance charge, this is the total amount with your finance charge, this is the total amount with your down payment. Just go through and point out those boxes. And then verbalize your payment, of course, is the $235.73 that we agreed to. This right here, you have 60 payments, and your first payment's due on July 12th or whatever that date is. Now on the electronic, if you are doing electronic, especially on the Harley system, you have to be really careful. If the electronic system advances the contract, you want to make sure that if you click on something and the contract moves forward without you going back and going over the information, you have to go page by page through the contract and at least give them a chance to look at it. Again, like I said before, as far as the disclosure itself, if you are doing electronically, give them the mouse, give them the iPad, give them full control. Tell them you'll be right back. Go print one more thing, or I have to check, make sure I've got this straight before you sign it. Then you come back to them and say, great, do you have any questions before we get started? And then you just close the contract. So that is really the piece that changed. The piece that changed is that giving them full control, giving them a chance to look over the contract, then asking if they have any questions before you go through the contract. And the issue is now that that's a precedent in court, it becomes very easy if you don't do that for a lawyer to come in, find that this is not your general practice, and you're guilty. You are guilty of doing it. There's no discussion of whether that is part of the disclosure or not anymore, where prior to this lawsuit, you could probably argue that that isn't how the law has been applied in the past, but now it is. So the other things I want to throw out there, I mentioned in the video that this is discussed in our textbook. So for the compliance training, we use the Hudson Cook, the attorneys at Hudson Cook put out a F&I legal desk book. And this usually comes out, it's updated every year, every other year, depending on the things that have happened within this space. They are the leading attorneys that deal with anything to do with dealership compliance. So if you don't have a copy of this book, I would definitely recommend it. It's not something you really read cover to cover. It's more of a question and answer style book. So if you have a question about a specific regulation, you can go in there and look it up and get your answers. The next webinar that we have, and I will be doing these on every Thursday now. I have been bumping around between Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but they all will be on Thursdays and they'll be at set times. The next one will be on the fair credit policy, which gets into how we deal with rate bump. It gets into a lot of different things that you need to make sure are set in policy, set in stone, standard operating procedures within your dealership, so that the dealership isn't at risk of getting in trouble. So if you have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat feature. I'll have a look at the chat box. I don't see anything in there right now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let you guys go. And if you have any questions, go ahead and email me and I will respond right back. compliance@garagecomposites.com, or you can send me an email at steve@garagecomposites. Either one works. So thank you very much for attending. Hope this was valuable to you. Actually, we're coming under 15 minutes this time, so trying to keep these real short for you guys. So thank you again, and hopefully I'll see you next week.